Hey everyone, I am D Nicole Williams, summer intern here at Kailua United Methodist Church, and I get the opportunity of presenting you with our devotion for the week. This week we're going through Galatians. We're talking about how the Galatian church was in a space where they were encountering differences among themselves with other communities of people that they were branching out to in ministry, but as well as going through these challenges around themselves, they were going through challenges within themselves. As a church, there was essentially a conflict between what was the new way and what was the old way, what was the Christian way and what was the Jewish way, what was even the way of the Gentiles and the way of Judaism. The conversation is one that we're familiar with because presently we understand what it is to really live, and in Hawaii to swim among differences. There are all types of things that happen around us that really have a way of influencing what happens on the inside of us too. And so you see the ministry of the Galatian church being one where there had to be a reset of sorts. There had to be this, let's call it a call to Jesus, a come to Jesus meeting where the ministers of the church and the church leaders at the time, the apostles, were letting the church know, hey, we're having to do things different now because Christ had a ministry that is going out among the people. There were apostles such as Peter and Paul, where they could go and do ministry among people who were not circumcised, because of course, it was the practice of the Jew to be circumcised. The practice was to go according to what the law said, and the law said you must be circumcised. You must be even, a Jew, right? So what happens when you introduce Christianity into communities that are not familiar with the freedom that is found in Christ Jesus? What happens when you're introducing Christianity into communities back then where the Greek saw no need to be circumcised? And so ministry still had to spread amongst people who were not accustomed to the law of the day. The same thing happens with us now. There are so many things within Christianity that causes us to look Christian. There are so many habits that we take up as the church that causes us to look a certain way and walk a certain way because we think that's what Christianity looks like. But what happens when we're trying to take ministry beyond ourselves? What happens when we're trying to take ministry beyond the walls of our churches? What do we do then? What do we do when we're encountering people who are quite different from us, people who they don't have a clue what church looks like or what church feels like because either they never came to church or they didn't grow up in it, or, they heard about it, as my grandmother would say, heard about it, but never was introduced to church or the church people. But what happens when we, as the church, as the people who are the believers, the faith-filled people, what happens when we try to take ministry beyond ourselves? And I want to call your attention to something. It's not that the people are unfamiliar with church. That's not the problem. The problem is that we, as the church, are unfamiliar with how can I authentically be Christian, but also exist in the world where so many social cues challenge my ability to stand strong and what it means to be a believer. What happens then? That's what we'll talk about this week. We're going to talk about how do we navigate being a Christian and being upright and being faith-filled, but not having a clue. How do I, or where do I stand on certain issues that we're facing in our present society? Where do I stand in Pride Month on the issue of LGBTQIA+? Where do I stand? And if I don't know where I stand, it'll be quite difficult for me as an individual to then minister to those who really know where they stand. Sometimes you all, as the believers, as the church, We don't always know how to communicate with others who feel differently or even who faith differently than we. But we must learn from the teachings of Galatians, because we have to learn that I don't have to change who I am in order to really navigate this new world. Why? Because I have freedom that is found in Christ. And so any changes that I take on should be led by Christ. They should be changes that help me to walk according to how Christ walked. They should be changes that allow me really to be free and liberated in my own identity, because no longer do I have to look a certain way, do I have to walk a certain way, no longer do I have to model these perfections that sometimes outsiders think that the church represents. How can I be authentically me in a way that allows me to have peace within myself? Because guess what? If I don't have peace within myself about some of these issues, then there's no way I could minister to or even have a deep conversation with someone who stands firmly in something that's different than what I believe. So of course, the example of Pride Month is just one, but there's so many examples of things that really cause conflict on the inside of us. Of course, there's politics, there's race, sometimes there's even like football team wars. But there are things that within us are so strong. We're so passionate about it. In my case, I'm a pastor, but I have to understand Black lives absolutely matter. And how can I authentically be a pastor, take up a pulpit, but speak in ways that create the idea of not just liberation as an African descent person, but liberation as a person who is free in Christ Jesus. And so that's my personal example, my personal business, but that's something that, we all have to think about. Sometimes, you all, among our friends, we get comfortable. And when we're in our homes, we're even more comfortable. But sometimes when we come to church, we're not so comfortable talking about those things that matter once we leave the walls of our home, the safety of our home, the safety of our friends. What I want to invite you to do, I want to invite you to see those areas in your life where you don't quite know where you stand, you don't quite know how to be because you don't quite know how people are going to respond to you. But I want you to get more comfortable being exactly who you are, feeling all of your feelings, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, whether you agree with someone else outside of the church or even inside the church or not. Be willing to disagree so that we can bring these conversations to the surface, so that we can not only learn that it's okay to have a feeling, it's okay to have an opinion, it's okay to have beliefs, but at the end of it all, we have to ask ourselves the age-old question of the 90s, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And if we can answer that question, we will learn how, because of our identity in Christ, because of our identity in Christ, we will learn how to find the freedom that can only be found in Christ Jesus. And we'll learn that this week through Galatians. So I'm not going to even tell you very specifically what to read, but I would encourage you to read the entire book of Galatians, right? I want to do that because I want to give you a full context. So often we look at our devotion and we're just reading a few verses, but I want you to have a rich context of the offerings in this service this week. So I want you to read through the book of Galatians. It's not long. It's just a few books, 6, I believe. 6 books. When you read through these books, you'll get an understanding of what was going on back then, and you'll also get some context for how that fills in the gaps that we are feeling presently. All right, so I invite you to join us on Sunday as we take this walk through the Word, and you can read it through the book of Galatians. All right? Have a great time. I will see you on Sunday. God bless.